Hannity, we begin with what is really a chilling Fox News alert. In moments, by the way, the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, he will join us live on camera to respond to the gut-wrenching disaster that is now unfolding inside Afghanistan as 10,000 plus American citizens are trapped inside the country, and we see no immediate plan to get them out as Joe Biden has been asleep at the wheel for days. We expect, he might momentarily arrive back from his vacation at the White House. We'll ask President Trump about his prior negotiations, direct negotiations with the Taliban, and the red lines that he put in place that Joe Biden clearly did not enforce. President Trump coming up exclusively. Meanwhile, tonight, Joe Biden finally coming back from Camp David and gearing up for what is, I guess, a restful night at the White House, while thousands of our fellow Americans are living through hell on earth in Afghanistan. We cannot even report to you tonight the exact number of Americans that are trapped inside Afghanistan. Somewhere, we're told, reports between 10,000 and maybe as many as 40,000 of our fellow Americans are trapped behind enemy lines spread out all over the country. We don't know where they all are. The Biden administration doesn't know exactly how many. They don't know where these Americans are located. And now Biden's State Department is just telling them, just shelter in place. And when notified, find your own way to the airport in Kabul. Please tell me that's not your plan. You guys are not serious. According to Biden's clueless national security advisor, the terrorists in the Taliban will, now that they're in control, provide safe passage. This as Taliban fighters are now savagely beating, shooting, stabbing people all around the airport. A foreign correspondent with the LA Times tweeted out these horrific images showing the Taliban using gunfire, whips, sticks, sharp objects to attack those on Airport Road. According to one U.S. official, quote, the Taliban have a ring outside of the airport. They won't let anyone inside it. And the big issue here is that no people outside of the Taliban ring will get in. No way they get 30,000, not even close. Over the weekend, we saw these images of a U.S. military plane packed with 600 plus people desperately fleeing Kabul. But now planes are taking off mostly empty. Why? Because the Taliban is not allowing passage into the airport. One German plane capable of carrying 150 individuals, they took off with 7 passengers on board. And meanwhile, Taliban terrorists, they're going now door to door, according to numerous reports tonight, searching for Americans, allies, and American interpreters, and anyone else who they believe assisted the U.S. in any way over the last 20 years. There are horrifying reports of people being tortured, dismembered, and executed in the streets across the country. According to the Washington Post, wow, when would they ever agree with Sean Hannity? U.S. citizens are now reaching out to anyone and everyone back in Washington for help. The Biden administration must get moving on a plan to rescue them before it's too late. Tonight, we all, as a country, we need to pray to God that it's not too late. With every passing hour and every passing day, we grow closer and closer to what could be possibly a mass hostage situation, or worse, the murder of Americans on a colossal scale. The number one priority of the Biden administration, when Joe finally gets back, he hasn't quite arrived yet, must be the safe evacuation of every American. But as we speak, at this hour, there's no plan to rescue our fellow citizens, let alone our allies, let alone the translators that were promised by our government that if this moment ever came, they would be protected by us and other Afghans that face certain death because of their assistance to our country in the last 20 years. There is no plan whatsoever. There's nothing. And even worse, the Biden administration won't even commit to securing the airport past August the 31st, even if fellow Americans are trapped inside the country. This I had to see for myself. I will let you decide.
Can you offer any guarantee to the Americans and Afghan allies that if they remain there past the end of the month, U.S. troops will help them evacuate past the end of the month.
Leisha, our focus right now is on doing the work at hand and on the task at hand. And that is day by day, getting as many American citizens, as many SIV applicants, as many members of a vulnerable population who are eligible to be evacuated to the airport and out on planes. And we're going to do that in an expeditious fashion. That is the focus of the President, of our Secretary of Defense, of our Secretary of State, and everybody on our national security team. So that is where we will keep our efforts.
Joe Biden and Jen Psaki, they had ignored this for 3 straight days as they've both been on vacation. Our defense secretary, our Secretary of State, the vice president, and all of the national security advisors seemed totally clueless and oblivious to what was unfolding before the world's eyes to see. To be clear, the Biden administration is making zero promises tonight. If you're afraid for your life and you are in Afghanistan and somehow seeing this show, whether you're an American or one of our allies, you have good reason to feel that way. If you're a journalist whose life is at risk tonight, like every other American, Joe Biden has no plan for you either. And none of this is political anyway. I don't care what news organization, I don't care why you're there, who you work for, you're a fellow American. Every good, decent American, we want you all home safely. But for whatever reason, Joe Biden just didn't seem to care, didn't seem to understand the magnitude as this was unfolding in record time when he told us this wouldn't happen. If you're a little girl tonight and you live in Afghanistan, well, the odds are higher that you will be enslaved by the Taliban. Joe Biden takes zero responsibility, as we saw yesterday. He's either heartless or completely checked out. You decide. And the situation unfolding in Afghanistan, not a single other world leader. Keep in mind, Biden was warned over and over and over again. Marco Rubio told us last night that his strategy for withdrawal would end in this disaster. Marco Rubio and others, Democrat and Republican senators on the Intel Committee, have been warning Biden and his administration repeatedly. They have been ignored repeatedly. Joe Biden's top generals, according to numerous reports, were pleading with him to slow the drawdown to conditions that were based on the ground when they were conducive, because they're not conducive right now for what's happening. Now, this is the single largest military intel debacle I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a number of them. And as this crisis is unfolding, China went right back on vacation. Or as the Wall Street Journal editorial board, well, quite eloquently put it, Biden to Afghanistan and the Americans there dropped dead. Biden is literally defiant in blaming others for his Afghan debacle. Even one former CIA analyst, I couldn't believe my eyes, on MSDNC was outraged, and rightly so. Take a look.
This consequential speech by the American president didn't run from it. He owned it. He owned his decision. He owned the fact that, as he put it, the buck stops with him.
I hope he gets to own their deaths, too. I feel like I watched a different speech than the rest of you guys. I was appalled. And the idea that the Afghan military should be blamed for this, do you know how many casualties the Afghan military took in an average year? More than the United States did in 20. When you're not getting paid on a regular basis, when you're not getting fuel, when no one is supplying you with ammunition, and yet you're still showing up to the fight, how dare us for having to blame these people for not having the audacity to be able to survive a Taliban onslaught? We promised them that in their time of need, we would take care of them. How do you ever expect anyone to ever trust us again if we don't do that now while we can?
Joe Biden has destroyed America's credibility around the world, and tonight, actually, that's the least of our worries. China and Russia, they're already looking to cut deals with the new Islamic Emirates, as it will be called, of Afghanistan, run by the terrorist-supporting Taliban. Terrorists from al-Qaeda will now have, again, a safe haven in Afghanistan, once again, just 2 decades after 9/11/2001. And get this, the reported mastermind behind the Taliban takeover, this ought to get your blood boiling. Yeah, we had him in custody. He was a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay. We had him. We had no reason to release him. But he was released in a swap, you might remember, for Army deserter Bo Bergdahl during the Obama-Biden administration. And if you recall at the time, they both assured all of us in America that they were going to Qatar and would never return to Afghanistan or terrorism ever again. But don't worry, according to the Biden administration, well, Americans can trust this terrorist to now give them safe passage to the airport that they now have created a perimeter around and not allowing anyone to get through, the one that's currently surrounded, the one that embassy workers were airlifted into. Joe Biden, this country just days ago, none of this would happen. How could he be so wrong? That's a question we'll be asking for a long time. Take a look.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan.
Now, this is a disaster on a massive scale. There's no end in sight. President Trump, as I told you, is moments away. We'll get his take. How will we deal with this from now? First, with reaction, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. He's been there many times, and he happened to be in Vietnam as well. There's a couple of Purple Hearts to show for it. Colonel, we don't know how many people. We all are. We know they can't get to the airport, and we know the planes aren't available, and nobody seems to have any plan to get them the hell out of there and did not see this coming. What do we do now?
Well, there were people who saw it coming, Sean. Let me go back to where we were last night.
You're right. I meant the Biden administration. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. Here's some real numbers, unlike the ones we've been hearing about. The number of American service members in Afghanistan through April 2nd, 2,448. U.S. contractors killed, 3,846. Afghan national military and police, 66,273. Anybody who says the Afghan army wouldn't fight is lying to himself and the American people, and of course to the people of Afghanistan. Who you think of the Gold Star families in the United States who missed those Americans who were killed over here? Think about what it's like if you're an Afghan and you lost your brother, you lost your father, you lost your sons. My God, we promised them that we were going to stick it out. We promised the same thing to those Terps. Turns out there's not just 10,000 interpreters. There's close to 50,000 if you count their family members. We promised to take them out with us. That's not happening. And there's a lot of other things that are coming out from this administration that just aren't true. I'll give you one. The other night, the president talked about this was yesterday, wasn't it? The president talked about over-the-horizon capabilities for dealing with counterterrorism. Let me just tell you something about over-the-horizon capabilities. Air power, but no search and rescue for downed pilots means the air power is useless. The unfolded faster than we expected comment. The president actually said that. This unfolded faster than we expected. Because he refused to take the advice from the CIA and from his own staff. But the bottom line of it is, it unfolded faster than we expected, gives you a clue as to what they ultimately expected to happen in Afghanistan. That we never heard that before. They just hoped it was going to happen in 6 to 9 months instead of 6 days. But the bottom line of it is, this administration has been deceiving us and the rest of the world. The Afghan military, 300,000. Yes, there were 300,000 well-equipped and well-trained. But that's not true once they started losing the troops when he set the withdrawal date. If you look back at the attrition rates in the Afghan military, it begins with him saying everybody's going to be out by the 31st of August. The fact the Taliban does not have an air force, in fact, they do now. Some of those aircraft weren't flown out of the country. Some of them were disabled. And the Taliban will find people because they've got the same kind of attractiveness, Sean, that ISIS used to have. Remember, there were people flooding to ISIS, radical Islamists from all over the world. And again, the comment about it's wrong to order American troops to fight if Afghan troops won't fight is absolutely an outrage. It's terrible. And lastly, let me just make one point. Freedom Alliance that you helped, we've got 500 college students who are the children of those who are killed are permanently disabled in the line of duty. 500 due to start college here in the next few weeks. Those 500 youngsters deserve to be remembered for they deserve to remember their fathers and their parents and their brothers for the kind of people that they really were. And they gave their lives for the safety of this country. They didn't give it to quit. They didn't want to quit. Many of them were volunteers who went back multiple times. I've been on the phone with several of them over the last couple of days. They're so despondent. I'm concerned that the suicide rate for our veterans, which dropped from 22 to 20 because of the programs put under the Veterans Administration and by organizations like Freedom Alliance, encourage them not to take their lives, is going to start to climb dramatically because this is such a depressing thing to happen. 10 days ago, we had 2,300 U.S. troops on the ground. We now have over 7,000, and we're looking for 10,000 Americans of various
at
jobs.
Least.
And, you know, they're
at least, Colonel.
Exactly. We don't know. We don't know how many there really are. How about that? And nobody can go out there and look for them because, after all, the Taliban is protecting us. God help us.
God help them and pray for them. Colonel, thank you. All right, Donald Trump in a few moments. First, following Biden's disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, our allies are now worried, rightly so, if they'll have U.S. support in their time of need. Today, the White House was forced to push back on Chinese propaganda attacking the U.S. and Taiwan, or what they call reunification. Here with reaction to that is Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. The Chinese now have aligned with Russia. They're providing arms to Iran. They have threatened our military bases, Japan's military bases. We know that they are talking about recognizing this new, quote, Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan as quickly as possible. On top of that, they're talking about reunification, which we both know would be the takeover of Taiwan. Question tonight is, Senator, what we now have all of our enemies seemingly trying to take advantage of what's going on here. How do we first save the lives of Americans in Afghanistan?
Yeah, Sean, you see the Chinese propaganda that's going to reverberate for years to come. But the immediate priority, as you say, is to get the Americans trapped behind Taliban lines out of Afghanistan. Joe Biden told a bald-faced lie yesterday when he said they planned for every contingency. They obviously did not, because there are 10 to 15,000 Americans behind Taliban checkpoints. My office has been in direct contact with hundreds of these people who have not heard from the State Department, who cannot get to the airport in Kabul because the Taliban have checkpoints all over the roads and control all access to it. And Joe Biden's administration won't even commit to stay in Afghanistan to secure that airport for 2 more weeks to get all those Americans out. And we're really now at the mercy of how long the Taliban is willing to grant safe passage to American citizens. This is a fiasco. It has grave, grave threats for our future if there's a massive hostage crisis, and it really reveals Joe Biden's impotence and incompetence to the whole world.
It really is scary, Senator, and how it can happen. Is there anything you can do, any words you can say? Do you have any confidence that we're going to get our fellow Americans the hell out of there?
Sean, I wish I could say that, but based on what I've seen from the Biden administration over the last 2 days, as my office has worked to provide information to hundreds of Americans, the State Department has basically told us that they don't want us to contact them anymore. Just send them to a website so they can fill out an e-form and hopefully get a text message. Well, what if their phones aren't charged? What if the Taliban cuts off cellular service? How are they supposed to get through Taliban lines to begin with? Joe Biden had no plan to evacuate 10 to 15,000 Americans when he pulled out all of our troops and our commander and shut down Bagram Air Base last month. You would think that the last thing you'd do is turn out the lights on your controlled air base and bring your commander and his troops home after you bring all the civilians home. But right now we have thousands of our countrymen trapped behind enemy lines at risk of being taken hostage by the Taliban at any time.
Senator, unbelievable. Never in my lifetime did I think this could happen. Thank you. President Trump, mere moments away. But first, joining us, former CIA station chief, Fox News contributor Dan Hoffman, former White House chief of staff Mark Meadows. I saw that Mike Pence said Biden broke our deal. I've noticed, Mark Meadows, that Joe Biden has tried to blame this on, let's see, the president of Afghanistan, the troops in Afghanistan that he assured us were very capable of easily defeating the Taliban. And then when all else fails, he blames President Trump. I have a number of sources that have told me that extraordinarily harsh and very clear language was used from President Trump. I'll ask him about it in a minute. To the Taliban, if they dared step one foot into any other region than that was in part of the agreement. Can you confirm or deny that?
I can confirm that. I can tell you that President Trump, you'll get to hear from him in just a few minutes, but I can tell you that he was not only straightforward in his conversations with the Taliban, but he was very clear that if any U.S. citizen, any U.S. asset, any U.S. personnel was actually harmed or in harm's way because of the Taliban, he would put the full force and might of the Department of Defense really with them as the bullseye of that target. I can tell you that also that for the blame to go for President Trump, not only did we take the withdrawal from Afghanistan and do it on a more measured process, what we also is put a blueprint out there for Biden to actually follow so that no one was in harm's way. You know, one key point: you don't take out and withdraw and leave 10,000 U.S. citizens there. You get this kind of debacle that we have right now, and it's nothing short of incompetence. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's a lack of actually acting on that intelligence that was so troubling.
And it wasn't followed at all, but it was laid out. Dan Hoffman, I've got to believe years from now we'll be studying how is it possible the President of the United States and our intelligence agencies could have been telling us last week, oh, they're even though they've taken over 60% of the country, they're 60 or 90 days away from ever getting anywhere near Kabul. I was hearing that last week. How could you be so wrong? How can Biden tell the country that he had all this confidence in this Afghan military when, in fact, there was no confidence to be had at all? How do you mess up that badly? You've been in intelligence for decades.
I mean, we knew all of this, and I absolutely expect that there will be a lot of hearings to follow, and I expect Director CIA Burns and DNI Avril Haines to be on the hot seat testifying before Congress and explaining exactly what sort of intelligence assessment they were providing the president. But let's make it clear, it wasn't exactly a secret that the government of Afghanistan lacked a bit of legitimacy. Only 2 million people voted in their last election. That's a country of roughly 40 million people. There were significant problems with their military, but as we've all noted repeatedly during the past few days, it was when this administration chose to withdraw our forces and the air power in particular, shut down Bagram Air Force Base. That's what put our mission at risk in Afghanistan. That's what produced what we have now, which is a fog of war. We don't have overhead reconnaissance and intelligence assets to collect intelligence on the threats to our people and country, nor do we have the ability to get them to the airport safely.
If we weren't ready to do this, the ground were the main criteria for President Trump's drawdown and ultimate changeover. But I got to run. Right now, we do have the president on the line. Thank you both. Mark Meadows, Dan Hoffman. Joining us now live is the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Mr. President, thank you for being with us. Let me go back. I've had a number of people tell me that there were very specific conditions and very specific warnings that you gave personally to the Taliban. Joe Biden is trying to blame you. I want first to give you an opportunity to respond to that, your assessment of what's going on, and what was that conversation to the extent you feel you're able to share it with us.
Well, it's good to be with you, Sean, but it's a terrible time for our country. I don't think in all of the years our country has ever been so humiliated. I don't know, would you call it a military defeat or a psychological defeat? There's never been anything like what's happened here. It's you can go back to Jimmy Carter with the hostages. We all thought that was a great embarrassment, and we were pulled out of that by Ronald Reagan. This is many, many times worse, and you're dealing with thousands and thousands of Americans and others that are stranded and very dangerously really stranded in Afghanistan. So it's something that you can't even believe that a thing like this could. I looked at that big monster cargo plane yesterday with people grabbing the side and trying to get flown out of Afghanistan because of their fear, and they're blowing off the plane from 2,000 feet up in the air. It's nobody's ever seen anything like that. That blows the helicopters in Vietnam away. That's not even a contest. This has been the most humiliating period of time I've ever seen. Yeah, we had a great deal. We worked on it very hard. Mike Pompeo, a brilliant guy, and many others worked on it endlessly. Meetings with the Taliban. Of course, you have to meet with the Taliban. They're the ones that you're negotiating with. I spoke on numerous occasions to the head of the Taliban, and we had a very strong conversation. I told him up front, I said, look, before we start, let me just tell you right now that if anything bad happens to Americans or anybody else, or if you ever come over to our land, we will hit you with a force that no country has ever been hit with before. A force so great that you won't even believe it. And your village, and we know where it is, and I named it, will be the first one.
Mr.
The first
President, I want to interrupt.
Dropped right there.
You said this to who?
Yeah.
Who did you said
to
that to who?
To Mullah Baradar, who is probably the top person. Now, nobody really knows who the top person is, but I would say that's probably the top person, and it seems to be that's the way it's rolling right now. But I had a very strong conversation. I also had a good conversation with him. We talked for a while after that. That was the primary point I was making, and he understood it. And I asked him, do you understand? He said, yes, I do understand. And I wanted them to get a deal done with the Afghan government. Now, I never had a lot of confidence, frankly, in Ghani. I said that openly and plainly. I thought he was a total crook. I thought he got away with murder. He spent all his time whining and dining our senators. I mean, the senators were in his pocket. That was one of the problems that we had, but I never liked him. And I guess based on his escape with cash, I don't know, maybe that's a true story. I would suspect it is. All you have to do is look at his lifestyle, study his houses where he lives. He got away with murder in many different ways. But I had a very, very strong talk with the Taliban, which I consider to be much more important in this sense because they were the problem. And they've been there for a long time, and they're good fighters, and they fight hard. And after I said that, we had a pretty good conversation. Now, I have to tell you that if you remember when they were coming to Washington to meet with me, they decided to kill an American soldier because they thought that was a good way to negotiate. And I canceled the trip. And we had a conditions-based agreement. And if you remember, it said May 1st, we want to get out because we have to get out. I've listened to people on your show and other shows say we should stay. They don't know. We were spending $42 billion a year. $42 billion. Think of it, $42 billion. I understand Russia spends $50 billion a year for their entire military. We were spending $42 billion, not 1%. They were saying 1%. That's a lot of nonsense. We're spending $42 billion a year on defending this for years and years. We've been there really now, not 20 years, but 21 and a half years. And we get nothing out of any of these things that we do, whether it's them or many other countries I could tell you about. I'm not going to insult anybody right now. But to spend that kind of money and then to have people get on shows and say how inexpensive it was. And I have to tell you also that we lost no soldiers in the last year and a half because of me and because of the understanding that we had. We lost no, think of that. In Chicago and in New York and in other cities in the United States, many people die every weekend. We lost no soldiers in Afghanistan because they knew I wasn't going to put up with it. And that's what happened. So we had a very strong conversation.
Let me ask you this, sir. You know, it's interesting to listen to Joe Biden blame you. I inherited this deal, he kept saying, but he also inherited secure borders, and he also inherited energy independence, and he also inherited 3 vaccines and therapeutics like Regeneron, and we now see what's been unfolding, and he didn't have inflation at the time. I want to go back. I want to be very clear here, because Secretary of State Pompeo on this program said exactly what you did, that there wouldn't be an exit strategy that didn't include the current conditions on the ground.